I grew up in a really rough part of Brooklyn. What were my parents like? My parents were sort of like deformed hippies in a way. Like they were hippies in one context, but then very much like that working class Brooklyn, like where some of the stereotypes you can even, imagine of Brooklyn. But they had this sort of like underlying hippie spirit that maybe never quite got to see itself. I don't know, generationally, like if there's something that we feel we want to express, it's, we're more invited to, where I think that generation maybe was, especially, being the kids of immigrants, it's like you definitely have that, make money, get things done, like hustle in a different way than the hustle that we have, say, as creatives, and so, yeah, I say like deformed hippies in the sense that they invoked in us like a spirit of freedom that was maybe too free, in a sense that it's like we were parents, like we were self-parenting, my brother and I. And yeah, so they were interesting. They were very interesting. But now in hindsight, I can look at it and appreciate the freedom, to be whatever we wanted, to hang out with whoever we wanted, to experience whatever we wanted, I mean, I think I was like, a Buddhist at 5. Then I was like, maybe I'm gonna go to church. And then maybe I was like, gonna go to synagogue. I was just curious. Right. And then I was studying Hinduism, and, it was just, everything was open.
So when you say deformed hippies, it's almost like they is that what you said, deformed?
I did. Yeah, that was my first word choice.
Yeah. No, it's okay. So it's kind of like they had this ideal of the world, but the reality is that they had to get jobs. But in the way they parented you, you were, would you call yourself a free spirit when you were young, or was it more just that's what your parents created in the house?
It's funny. It's like I was the opposite of a free spirit, maybe because they were so free that I created such boundaries for myself, like such levels of discipline, when it came to my studies or things that I did, like everything had to be perfectly even and perfectly straight. And I was a perfect student, and I got the best grades, and I drew and I sang and I played music by ear and all these kind of things. Like I was very disciplined, in a way that maybe they weren't, as like an opposite effect. And then all of a sudden I was like, I'm going to be, at some point, a filmmaker. I wanted to be a filmmaker. So
yeah, I wanted to ask you about. Yeah, but you touched on an interesting point. Are you the oldest sibling?
I am. I have a younger brother. Yeah, we're 60 months apart.
Yeah, I have a younger sister. We're about that same age apart, actually. What do you think? It's kind of fascinating. Here's maybe a through line between the two of us. I'm also the firstborn. And I also I grew up feeling very disciplined. My parents were similar. They didn't want to force me into any kind of job, but it's interesting thinking about the discipline, growing up with discipline, but then getting into a creative field. What do you think? Yeah. What do you think is like the through line there? Because that's fascinating.
I mean, I don't know. It's sort of like maybe everything was always sort of bubbling under the surface, and even though I had imposed such a discipline on myself to, maybe in rebellion to them. So maybe the underlying rebellion then just became against my own self, and led me toward, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I always drew and I loved reading and, and I always made things. So it was very natural to me, but, and I guess kind of like my parents thought because of like my grades and whatnot, that I would be a doctor or a lawyer. And maybe that was the hope, I'd be that first kid to go to college and be successful. Cause that defined, I think, success for a lot of people of that generation, it came down to a good job and money, more so than contentment and happiness and feeling fulfilled. So yeah, in a way, it was sort of like maybe my own rebellion against myself in a sense.
I think that's true. I think there is an underlying feeling of rebellion within creativity.
Yeah.
Because I think as creatives, we are, we really have to look into ourselves and kind of evaluate the things we went through, or the way the world is. There's kind of there's a curiosity aspect, and that within yourself, right? And kind of maybe finding the borders of what you want to explore. Your parents, you said you were immigrant. Where did your parents come from?
Well, my parents were the kids of immigrants.
They were.
My parents were first generation. Yeah. So my dad's side was from the south of Italy. My grandfather from Partana, and my grandmother from Bari. And my mom's side, my grandfather was Russian, but he learned when he was getting married that his mother wasn't his real mother. So I don't actually know my full history. And, and his last name wasn't his last name because it was, changed at Ellis Island. And no one in my family, my mom had a very large family. They lived in a 2-bedroom tenement house, but they were a huge family, like 5 kids, a mom and dad. And they never really looked, they didn't inquire into, where they were really from. I mean, you can look at me and I look Persian, or, and like my grandfather looked Arabic, but no one really did the homework to find out. And I know we can, and even, and honestly, in all truth now, it's like, I know I can do those, ancestry type things and learn it. But in a way, I've been so comfortable with not knowing where I'm from, that it would almost like shift who I am to know. I don't know. It's like now at this point, I'm comfortable with the mystery. Yeah.
I feel, in a way, I feel a bit similar. My last name, by blood is not actually Curry. It would have been something else, but my dad was adopted when he was, just a baby by my stepdad. So, I mean, I'm sure I have, Irish blood or something. I mean, we could kind of maybe pinpoint it, but I really don't want to know, to be honest. And not because I'm not curious about it, but just because I think maybe I don't want to rely on that history or something. I'm not really sure. I just kind of like, I'm a bit of a forward thinker, like a future thinker. So I'm not, I love my family, and, I think history is very fascinating, but, I'm kind of okay being, just American in a way. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. It's like, so much of what I do as a stylist is an inquiry into humans, and so much of that is maybe just trying to understand even my own history, like my medical history, my history of like where my family is from and all of these things. And and not having one, it made me so open to so many things. And, and I think a lot of that compels what I do as a stylist, just because, the through line is honestly, we all get dressed every day. So it's like finding all of those things, whereby we all tell our stories through what we put on our bags. And that for me is enough.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. That exploration of human nature. How, I mean, in what ways do you explore that when you're styling? I mean, maybe first we should start from like how you even got into styling. You said you went to film school. Was there a film in particular or a director that inspired you, that made you want to go into film originally?
Not really. I mean, I love films. I mean, I don't know, like even when I was, 5, I had a major crush on Humphrey Bogart, and I would just watch Casablanca over and over and over again. Yeah, I literally knew all the words by heart at like age 5 or 6. But no, I mean, it's funny because it wasn't that like a particular film compelled me in that direction. I think, maybe it was some of the same, just like very, very much in quest of story, and I don't know. It was weird because I was a super top student. I could have gone to, anywhere and blah, blah, blah. But like, I only applied to two schools when I was applying to colleges, NYU and USC. And I got into both, and I went to NYU. And in my first semester of NYU, I was like, I don't want to be a filmmaker. But I picked up a camera in a framing and sequencing class, and I loved taking pictures. It's like I then quickly became more attracted to the frozen image as, kind of, I don't know, the depth of storytelling from a singular image, like maybe looking at the work of, say, a Robert Frank or a Gary Winograd, and, just seeing how much story came from this one still, as opposed to, the guiding movement. And then I didn't want to be a filmmaker anymore. And plus, I'm at NYU where it was like half the kids are already talking about movies they're making and, and this and that. And I'm just some like poor kid from Brooklyn who's like, I don't know, I don't have a film coming out. I don't have like my uncle knows this one or that one or any of this stuff. Like,
yeah,
it's like my uncle, worked in the Social Security office of New York. It's like, I got nothing. So yeah, I don't know. It just like, and I kind of realized then that I didn't want to be a filmmaker, but I couldn't afford to stay at NYU and kind of figure it out. So I had learned that Allen Ginsberg was a teacher at Brooklyn College. And so I decided to go to Brooklyn College, and I studied William Blake with Allen Ginsberg right before he died.
Wow.
And and it was there that, I changed my major to philosophy just out of my own, curiosity and not really sure what I wanted to do. But I became very, very attached to the head of the photo department there, Bob D'Alessandro, who, funnily enough, I just did a studio visit with in New York. He's 80, and I'm
Amazing.
trying to help him. Yeah, I'm trying to help him place his archives. And I took one of my best friends is an amazing curator and has had some really incredible positions. And so we went and did a studio visit with Bob because he's 80 and I want to see his legacy live on. And he's a brilliant photographer. So
that's beautiful. It's like it's like a full circle moment.
Yeah, exactly. So so I studied with Alan, I met Bob, and, and so anyway, but the question, this is a long-winded answer to the question of like styling. I had no interest in fashion at all. I was very politically motivated. I was, a strong feminist, and I kind of saw I saw fashion or magazines as like, kind of a negative thing toward women. I didn't see it as I do now. And I had such strong political ideas, and I wore a uniform, actually. I always wore khaki pants and black shirts, and people would always compliment my outfit, and it would annoy me because I didn't want to be seen as, as anything beyond, my brain, I guess, or something. I don't know. I just found it superficial. But I lived in Dumbo, and I had this roommate who was a budding fashion photographer, and I would just do these shoots with him because like I'd get like $50 cash, $100 cash. And as a college kid with $300 rent in Dumbo, between me and my roommates, it paid my bills. And so I did it begrudgingly, but and then one day he said, I can never make it in this business. And I said, well, fuck you. And here I am.
Part of
really
that rebellion. Yeah, part of that rebellion coming back. I think there's just going back to your parents and then going to film school. There's probably something in that, for kids who grow up in a household that doesn't have any creators or artists, the first thing we're thinking about is a job, right? I mean, I didn't have any artists in my family, so I originally wanted to do architecture. But I think in you wanting to do film, you know, it's probably similar in that there is a field that we saw that, you know, you could make money in, but it had that bit of creativity, right? And similar to your story at NYU, I did a architecture internship just the summer before I was going to school. And on like my second or third day, one of the architects I was shadowing sat me down and he was like, Drew, you don't want to be an architect. And he went through all these reasons why he's like, you want to be Frank Gehry, but in reality, you know, you're going to be renovating gymnasiums and like school lunchrooms. And, you know, so it's funny thinking back now, you know, about an architect at this firm that was telling me that I should not do it. But I felt like, you know, at the time I was making t-shirts already for my friends. So I was already a bit on the edge of like, do I want to even do this? But that was kind of the sign, which is why I pivoted.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny how those voices come in and they compel us in such big ways, not realizing that they make these lifelong impacts on us.
Yeah, exactly. Tell me a bit about, I mean, it's really those serendipitous moments, right? I mean, like getting to study with Allen Ginsberg, or like when looking back now over the course of your, you know, career, I guess we can call it, what were some of those serendipitous moments that kind of got you to this point? Maybe when you were discouraged and, you know, kind of a miracle came from the sky. I'm sure you have a few things.
I do. I really do. I have been incredibly lucky. I mean, you know, I'm driven, but I also am very naive, and I have always been in a way, like, and it's funny because, you know, I grew up like such a street kid, like, you know, and but I have a certain naivete about me, but, and maybe as a result of it, certain things that, you know, because I didn't know the steps, perhaps I would take curvaceous routes and, you know, and not straight line approaches, or, you know, I would take straight line approaches actually instead of, you know, curving through things perhaps. But I got a job at MTV because I liked music, and I just like, you know, and I wasn't there for very long, but I suddenly was like front row at fashion shows, and, you know, and people were handing me clothes, and it was almost in a way weirdly reinforcing some of my initial ideas about fashion, in the sense of like, you know, people just handing me things, and, you know, and there was like, you know, more money, I guess, in those days too, where people did hand you things. And then I was like, okay, you know, and friends around me would talk about their agents, like model friends or photographer friends or whatever. And I was like, I don't know, maybe I need an agent. And I went to an agency called Streeters because I'm streety. Like, that was literally why I went there. And I dropped my little portfolio off of, you know, whatever little test shoots and things that I had done. And someone called me the next day and said, you're not ready for representation. However, Alex White is looking for a new assistant. And I honestly didn't even know who Alex was. I didn't know who Katie Grand was, you know, and they were both rep by the agency. And so I met with Alex, and she liked me enough to, you know, to take me on. And suddenly I was with her at W Magazine. I was with her. She was consulting for Toka at the time, a brand called Toka. And so I was with her on her consultancy days there. And so, you know, it's funny because it informed a lot of the career that I have now, where I work directly with brands. I'm a fashion director. And I do various ad campaigns and like, you know, very much similar to how Alex was, without even realizing that I was following her path. Again, it wasn't until later that I was like, oh yeah, that kind of rolled out this way. So I mean, that was how I got my first understanding that fashion isn't vacuous, that it is about research, and it is a lot of work, and, you know, and a lot of energy and team and community, and, you know, people coming together to create the editorial process, which, you know, kind of in a way was closer to filmmaking in that sense, because you have, you know, these 8, 10, 12, 20 stills to tell a story, you know, and and in those days, it's like, I don't know, the wildness of how these stories would come together, not wild in a sense of like crazy or whatever, but just, the subtlety of detail was really incredible. And I think also being, firsthand and touching such incredible clothes and seeing what went into them and craftsmanship, and then it sucked me in. So yeah, that was one serendipitous occurrence that altered my life, forever, and shifted into this career.
And suddenly you were around the excess, like all these clothes, all these brands, but you were looking at it through a new lens, through that more of a storytelling lens and an artistic lens, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to just that lens of excess.
Yeah, exactly. It no longer felt like something I couldn't be a part of. It felt like something I could aspire to be a part of. Aspire to own something so beautiful, aspire to be able to play with these things that were so beautiful, aspire to tell stories in ways that are, beyond words, and and image, like it's okay to tell image-based stories, and do it from clothes, because clothes have stories to them, the story of what the designer was thinking, the story of what he or she and their team then created around that thought, and, and the seasonal work that goes into it. And it just became something so incredibly precious to me. And then, once it leaves that team's hands and it goes into the hands of the editor, or ultimately later I learned, what the buyer side then, to what you see in a store, and just this level of process and thought that goes into it all was very special to me, and it still is. I think it always will be.
Yeah. Working with an incredible, stylist like Alex, do you remember the moment where things really clicked for you? Was there a moment when you were like, this is really what I want to do? Or was it more the culmination of time spent with her?
I mean, I wasn't with her that long, because I was like I was a street punk, and like, and really I didn't really have I don't know. I didn't really understand. I guess this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like you do this step, you do this for X amount of time, and then from there you do this, like a traditional route. How an assistant then becomes an editor. I went off on a funny little path where I started just doing little bits and whatnot, and then I had met a young designer at the time, and her boyfriend then was an editor at the Fader magazine. And so I like met up with them at a bar, and next thing I knew, I was, a part of the Fader, which at the time was like a really incredible thing, because I was a music nerd, and, and it was just so energized and forward in its thinking and creative, and a lot of really incredible people have come out of the Fader. Like, Shioma is now heading up British Vogue, and Will is heading up GQ. Like some good eggs have come out of that Fader. But yeah, so suddenly I was at the Fader, and again, it was like, it happened so easily. I mean, not that it happened so easily. I don't want to make it all sound like a joke, like everything's super easy, but it just happened, maybe energetically. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, it's not like, I don't know, just, maybe the way I spoke, or the curiosity, or the dialogues that we had clicked, and so there I was at the Fader. So that was like my first effort as an editor.
And that's, I think that shows the beauty of being in a fashion capital, right? Is that you're almost like, I don't know if I believe in luck necessarily, that it's an accident, but it's almost like you can create your luck in kind of being where the energy is. Mm-hmm. And you were just around, and you were just working on things, and one thing led to another.
Yeah. I mean, there is definitely something to be said for, being in a city as New York, all my life. It's like, there's an energy here that's different to anywhere, and and there's an openness to that energy, if you seek it. And we're, in all truth, we're like all on top of each other. It's like there's so many of us in this tiny part of the country, and and in Manhattan especially, it's like there's so many of us crammed, and Brooklyn gets more expansive, et cetera, but New York City is really small in the grand scheme. So yeah, and there's a certain intimacy that as a city, I don't know, I think we all feel. Like I said something once to someone, I was like, New York is the only city where I feel like we describe ourselves as a we, like we in New York, and and there is something inherently community in that. Yeah.
And New York really does own that community. I feel like, the people that I meet, especially the ones from New York, even if they no longer live there, they're almost like diehard for New York, which is different than like a diehard for Los Angeles or even Paris.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. Like, I mean, I have an apartment in Paris now, and I spend a lot of my time there. But I always kind of say I'm going home when I'm coming back to New York, where like, I love Paris. I love my life there. I have great friends, and I like where things are moving in my career in being there. But it's like, there's always that part of me that's like, I'm going home when I'm coming to New York.
Yeah. You've probably lived through some incredible moments being in New York, from like within music and fashion. I mean, what was happening within fashion when you were growing up? I know you weren't paying attention to it so much, but what do you remember about growing up, and then maybe when you felt like it was shifting to where New York really was a fashion capital?
I mean, for me, it probably was through hip hop, like it just, I mean, we definitely had like this punk and new wave thing, but it was really hip hop that changed the game for New York, or at least for me, from a fashion perspective, because it was just like a whoosh of, incredible music and culture and everything in a way that just felt like hours, yeah, I could listen to The Cure, Depeche Mode, and I could be a goth girl on a Thursday if I want to, but hip hop was ours. Like, it started here. It will always be rooted here. And so I think, and the brands that were popular, even if they weren't New York brands, they just had this like this essence, from, I don't know, Girbeau, Fubu, Cross Colors, like random, like just, I don't know, like random mall brands that just like were so dope, that no one will ever even remember the name of, kind of a thing. But it was like, but hip hop, Carl Kanai, etc. Like all of these things just, just hit like a whoosh.
Yeah, and that's some of the benefit, I think, of just a diverse place in general. I know I grew up in the Seattle area in Tacoma, Washington. And Tacoma, Seattle in general, it's had its music and fashion moments, I guess, with, of course, with Kurt Cobain and the music scene at the time. But, it's not a fashion capital, but I grew up with, Korean friends, Hispanic friends, like, my city was white and black and brown, and we had, Native American tribes in the area. And even though it wasn't even though fashion wasn't really happening there, I feel like I was exposed to a lot of different cultures. Mm-hmm. And I think it seems like in New York, just all of the cultures are there. And then you have the added benefit of that. You have to walk and take the subway, which is like, so you're seeing it, you're taking in all of this culture on a daily basis. It's one of the things that I wish LA was like that. I have to drive everywhere. And I always take advantage of when I'm in New York or Paris by walking as much as I can, just because I love like taking in that energy. Mm-hmm. Do you remember your first piece of clothing that was like your first fashion piece?
Oh gosh. I mean, it's funny because Century 21 had like, you could find like a Rick Owens something, or you can find like a Burberry something, or a dot something. Like you would find random. God, what was that first piece? Wow, that's kind of heartbreaking that I don't know. I'm trying to think. Like I know we'll like 2 days from now I'll be like, of course it was dot, but nothing. It's funny because I just moved to a new apartment, and weirdly there's this like big puffy Norma Kamali camouflage like kimono style wrap thing that's just like I kind of see it a little bit shoved in front of me, like where like on a garment rack of like, I don't know where this lives yet, And I remember getting that, and that was not the piece, but I do remember getting that thing and thinking it was so weird and crazy, because it looks like it'd be so warm, but it's not. It's thin and it's just big. So I don't know. That's
and you still have it.
Yeah. Oh, I could tell you what the fashion piece was. A Helmut Lang suit. Yeah, a gray Helmut Lang suit. And I remember that suit so vividly because I was on a shoot and the tailor, like, it was big on me. And I had just gone through a breakup, and I was just like super skinny. I mean, I'm a small, skinny gal, but it was like post breakup skinny. And this tailor was like, oh, I can tailor this for you. And I don't even know why I had it. Oh, maybe it was like a multiple day shoot. And I was asking her about cause I didn't know how to get anything tailored at the time, And I maybe was asking her, and she's like, oh, bring it, I can do it on set. And I brought it, and then I never picked it up from her. And then her studio theoretically caught on fire, which sucks for her. And so I never actually got to wear that suit more than once.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I got to wear it very big and, baggy on me, but, and it probably wouldn't even fit me anyway, because then, post breakup, your body comes back to its form. And even though I'm still a tiny gal, I'm not a post breakup body. And I'd also bought Stingray heels from Helmut Lang. I still have those. The heel broke on one, and I am going to get it. There used to be this shoe repair place in the city on 56th Street. I don't know if they're still there, but they had fixed those shoes once before, like good as new. And so I have them to still fix them. So yeah, it was like a little Helmut Lang moment, I guess. Yeah.
Helmut Lang, I mean, that must have been a real moment. Did it feel like, I mean, when we look back on New York fashion, Helmut Lang was, one of those that really marked, made a huge impact in the history of fashion, and especially New York fashion.
Yeah.
How did it feel at that moment? Did it feel as impactful then, or is it more just looking back on those moments now, you feel like we as a collective group kind of make it a bit more special?
Well, it's funny. It's like, I think about this sometimes, when I look at like old Helmut or even old Calvin, things like that. It wasn't tricky. It wasn't like a lot was going on. And even, Helmut Lang, the fabrics were not even always the best, but there was something that was so magnanimous about what Helmut did. And maybe it was the whole scale of the energy of it, the mystery of just this logo, newsprint, figures that you couldn't fully discern, and just this hunger, and just this sexiness. Like, there was just something so effortless and considered. I still have a Helmut Lang t-shirt that was like, that was probably the first piece I bought, actually, the first whoa piece, because I bought $180 t-shirt, which was like, it was
would have been insane back then. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, but I still wear that t-shirt. It's still incredible. And I wore that t-shirt like all the time. But there was just something I don't know, like, I was younger than, than people who knew about what Helmut was doing or this or that. I was just, a kid who was like just starting out. So, I didn't know the full ins and outs as, say like a fashion editor of the time might, but I knew that it was something it was a club I wanted to be part of, And I think it was that, that mystery to it, probably like similar for like Margiela, for people like that wanting to be in that club, and the not knowing was so sexy and mysterious and, like, was he a man? Was he a collective? Well, like in all of these questions, like, and these garments that were seemingly simple, but so complex in their thinking, and so it was such an intellectual period of fashion, even more so than the clothes themselves, like we're saying, looking at like a Bottega garment now that's like absolutely stunning, but there's the intelligence is in the garment, where it was like this whole curiosity.
Around the whole story of the brand.
Yeah.
It's interesting, thinking about that time, and, it was pre-internet, like the internet that we have now. And it's fascinating to look back and see how, you had Helmut Lang and you had Jill and you had, Martin Margiela, all these designers that were, from different places, living in different places, all making, something. They had their own language, right? But they were all a part of this group almost without like coming out at the same time, and like having a synergy there. But I mean, I don't know if they were communicating or not, but it's really fascinating to look back at that era and see pre-internet how these different designers were all going toward a similar mission or a similar energy.
Yeah. Right. Like whether they knew about what the other was doing initially, and it just, the movement just sort of surfaced. I don't know. But I mean, in my young fashion mind, I just loved the minimal, like, and maybe coming from some of my like political leans or, initial thoughts about fashion, maybe that's why it was so attractive to me, because, especially thinking about Helmut or Calvin, these were just human endeavors. CK1 wasn't about the clothes. It was like, people with no shirts. And, it was a scent, and it was a scent like of just something desirable, that went beyond clothes and yet had clothes.
And it was, I'm sure that at the time that, the resistance, you kind of were talking about, I mean, that was fashion resistance for the time, right? I mean, it was coming out of, you're coming out of the 80s when it was, loud colors and, large prints. And so I think part of it was also, the resistance of the time was to go towards something more minimal. And I also think it's fascinating that I think about this a lot, but if you grow up, not having a lot of money, we only got one pair of shoes a year, or like, one pair of jeans or whatever it was. So you really couldn't get something super loud or colorful, because you had to, at least I felt this way. I can't speak for you, but, I felt like I have to get like this one thing that can go with like every single thing that I have.
Yeah.
So there must have been something there that you connected with as well.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, because even thinking about your clothes, like what you do is so wonderfully textural. And, it's not like a broad color palette, like everything could live with everything else. And I feel like, from season to season, that's the case too, like what you did a season ago will go with what you do in 3 seasons, and there's probably a bit of that in your thinking as you're crafting, but like texturally, there's something that builds in what you do that I particularly enjoy. And And then you kind of even twist what would be the basic, like your pocket goes here, as opposed to in a standard place. Or I really appreciate that about what you do.
Thank you, Julie. I think, it goes back to growing up. I had a scholarship to a private school, and the private school had a uniform. So my first taste of fashion, if you could even call it fashion, was I was forced to wear, certain colors, and I had to wear polo and khakis and that kind of thing. And so, the resistance that I was feeling was I'm gonna kind of show, how I feel through the things that were not a part of the uniform, so like through my shoes, or, I would get in trouble because I would come to school in like a polo that was like slightly off color from what we were wearing, so so that was that uniform piece is a really important part of my foundation and kind of how I understand fashion and menswear in particular.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's really interesting.
It's part of that story you want to tell too, right? And I think within menswear, at least what I want to explore is, or how I think about it really is taking the wearer on a journey or on a path, and kind of not just dropping them into like a certain destination every season. I want this to be something like we kind of explore together as I'm exploring it within myself. Mm-hmm. Like I'm kind of taking the IRA wearer on a journey as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think about like the designers I wear a lot of, I think they all have that kind of similitude, like I appreciate that Dries is so clever because he plays with prints and changes the prints, and yet something from Dries 4 years ago is just as relevant as what I'll buy from the last show from the other week. It's like it's pretty clever. Or like Tom Brown, like taking this sense of uniform and turning it into a 20-year business. I can't believe it's 20 years now. Like there's something, or even Rick keeping his textures and his tones, have been fairly consistent, and then just playing with texture to create something, otherworldly at times. But, I think that's always really intriguing to me. And then of course, like the Jills and the Row and, and Zhenya and brands like this that have like, I love that you can take something from however long ago and it still feels exciting to put it on.
I really think that's true luxury in our day and age.
Yeah, exactly.
That the fact that you have that Helmut Lang, t-shirt that you bought, so many years ago, that still feels like, something that you want to put on and wear around the city. I mean, that's a really important part of what we do, right? And that's part of the story, but that's true elegance and luxury, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. It was such a shame when the term quiet luxury just went overboard, because it really did, when I first heard it, it resonated with me because I'm fairly quiet and I just do my thing as a stylist, and like, people pick up on it if they do, and if they don't, it's okay. And, and it's the same with clothes, like I could wear, I don't know, I wear $10,000 on my back, and it's just as important as if I'm wearing, like a 15-year-old H&M t-shirt, which is equally as valuable to me, by the way. I have some like H&M t-shirts from 15 years ago that are ripping off my body, but no t-shirt has ever compared to this one. But like, just a sense of just quietly appreciating what it is that you enjoy, what matters. And, it was a real bummer for me when it started to just topple, and become yet another buzzy trend word for that reason.
Yeah. But I think at the same time, with how fast information spreads now, and kind of this focus on, not just fast fashion, but almost like, meme clothing, or like, something that's just going to like blow up on TikTok. It's almost, I don't like the quiet luxury label. At the same time, something probably there was going to be a label for it, right? Just because of of just the opposite that's happening at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of like, at the end of the day, it's like, when skinny jeans become wide jeans, become, flared jeans become ... The person who likes skinny jeans is still going to wear their skinny jeans. They're not going to abandon them and only put on a wide-legged jean. Like people are going to stick with what they like and what makes them feel good, and that's the beauty of clothes. So while the term may have become something of an annoyance, it's the clothes still the same. And
we'll all still be doing it. We'll all still be doing it regardless of what the label is, because it's things we love.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So like my version of skinny jeans is waiting for Phoebe to come back in a couple weeks.
We're all anxiously waiting. It was being a Helmut Lang fan, it was probably pretty cool to get to work with Peter on the most recent show. I know you love Peter and you love his brand. Tell me about working with him and working on Helmut Lang together.
I mean, it was interesting. It's a difficult brand for anybody to step foot in, because it is so referenced. It is so important to the fashion dialogue, and coming into those shoes are super difficult for anyone. And I think, Peter rose to the occasion and brought in what what felt right to him. And love it or hate it, he did what felt right to him. And, and that is the most any designer can do when in a situation of taking over a house that has someone's name on the door. Especially someone like Helmut, who was so beloved and still is and always will be.
And that's why it's been hard since he left.
Yeah. It's, it's, there's certain brands that it's difficult to think how it functions without. I think Lanvin is similar in a way, like, what is next for a brand like Lanvin to give it that energy that Albert brought to the house, and I think they're trying, they're making that effort, and I'm a firm believer that where there's a will, there's a way. And, and I think that's all any designer can do is execute their will and their, and their talents and hope for the best, and hopefully there's space for everybody.
Yeah. It's difficult to take over a name brand, and you're right. I mean, you're sweet to have grace about it, because it's a difficult job, and there's so much pressure in fashion now, to like perform right away, and like it needs to be perfect right away. Otherwise you're out of a job. And I think, I mean, speaking as a creative too, that's a lot of pressure to come into. It's one thing when it's your name brand, right? Because you can kind of like go with your feeling, but when you have to digest a huge archive of stuff and you want to do right by him, but you also want to make it fresh, and then things can get lost easily.
Yeah, I think that's where it does get really difficult. I think taking over, a house that has a structure and employees and, and targets and deliverables and all the things that, companies and need to consider. It's a different challenge, because the creativity is also in being a business person in those instances, because we can all make beautiful things, but we have to know how to make them profitable in order to keep doing it, in order to keep the chain in alignment, because there are a lot of people who rely on the success of a brand. You know, it's never just about a singular designer. It's never just about those of us who go to see the fashion shows. It's like the chain is really big. And I hold I hold that very close to my chest because, you know, coming from a working class family, it's like, I think about I try at all points, you know, to think about the chain and how that impacts, you know, because as great as a brand is, also impacts, you know, everyone through the door. And I try to take that very seriously in the decisions that I make. And, you know, especially when working with brands, like how to use my skill sets to also enable them to, you know, to be a creative aid, but also to be a creative aid with everybody in mind. And I enjoy that science.
Yeah. Tell me about working with Alessandro, because was he at Berluti, right? Was he the first designer that you worked with on a fashion show?
Yeah. Well, no, actually he wasn't. I had styled Hardy Amy's in London with a wonderful guy named Mehmet, who was the creative director of Hardy Amy's at the time. And then Alessandro had seen it. We had met. I was fashion director of a men's title called Man of the World at the time that Berluti launched. And it was sort of like, I was like, what is this brand that's in my head? And I think Alessandro had a similar reaction of like, what is this magazine that's in my head? Because we were both kind of pursuing a similar guy that didn't really exist prior. Or at least in that, you know, in that rough period, didn't, like, you know, it was very more like rugged and an adventurer. And, you know, like I've always been obsessed with explorers and, you know, and a lot of that was the approach that I took to the fashion direction. And so, the Berluti store had opened in New York, and I met Alessandro, and it was like, you know, what we were saying earlier, like feeling like you've known someone forever. And we were just chatting, and like, I could have sat there for hours just talking to him. He was just such an incredible guy, and he still is. And so, you know, so we would have conversations now and then, and, you know, like a new issue of the magazine would come out. He would send me a note to congratulate me. The new show would happen, and I would, you know, send him a message to congratulate him. And then at one point, Alessandro, he said, Julie, I would like to change stylists. I'd like to work with you. And I was like, oh, jaw to the floor, like, ah. And so LVMH was my first like mega show, I guess, you know, working with Alessandro on Berluti. Yeah. And, you know, and he's such an incredible mind, and yeah, just being a part of that process of, you know, like I had never been, you know, a part of seeing things earlier than right before show time as well. And, you know, and working with Alessandro, you get to see what he's working on, you know, through the process. And that for me was very special, like similar to, you know, to suddenly being at W in that sense, and suddenly seeing just how much involvement and, you know, in the process. And so, you know, Alessandro was my first window into the depth of process to putting on a fashion show. And and then when he went back to Zhenya, I was lucky enough to be taken with, and now it's, gosh, I think 8 years or 8.5 years we're working together. Something
That's amazing.
Like that. 2016 was that Berluti show. So I don't know, 8 years, I think. Yeah.
Tell me about, I mean, what does it take, or what's the feeling when working with Alessandro specifically, but, you know, what really makes a good designer stylist partnership?
Trust, first and foremost. You know, Alessandro trusts me and I trust him, and secondly, communication. You know, it's an open dialogue, you know, of ideas, and, you know, we might not agree on everything, but there's space to explain why it is that, we might think X, Y, or Z, and, and coming at it, we're two very different people. We're from, different places. I grew up in New York, he grew up in Italy, and, so that alone gives you a different scope. And it's nice to be able to bring this like little Brooklyn kid over into, such this storied house, and sometimes it's like, what are you saying, Julie? Like I feel like I'm talking another language, but it's the joy of coming from two different languages. I mean, actually two different languages. My first language is English, is Italian, but it's like there's something so beautiful in finding that common ground, and so I think trust, communication, and a willingness to play, a willingness to play. Like I laugh all the time with him, and and with that we come to these incredible solutions for how the show will come across, and it's really a pleasure.
That's beautiful. I think you touched on something so important that's a part of our work that a lot of people don't talk about, is that play aspect and really having fun with it. What do you do now that you've been, in this world for as long as you have? How do you still keep that joyful, playful spirit?
Honestly, it's like gratitude. I'm just really grateful for everything that I get to do. I make a living by playing, and that's a really special thing. And I never take it for granted. It's, I don't know. It's, I'm still that wide-eyed kid who's like, how did I get here? Like now I can talk about like the panic attacks I would have before, like going through the door at the Berluti, the LVMH building in Berluti. And like, I would literally stand outside and have like little panic attacks. And then suddenly someone would open the door and I'm like, oh, hello, and, I'm still this wide-eyed kid. Like everything is new to me, every story, every fashion collection, everything, every conversation, it all takes us somewhere, along a path.
Do you have a daily practice, something that you do daily to, recognize your gratitude?
Once upon a time, I would wake up, I would do a little qigong, I would meditate and start my day. And admittedly, a lot of my days started with my phone in my hand, looking at Instagram or, answering some emails from overseas or, something or other. So I would like to say that I have a practice, but I'm not as disciplined as I would like to be. I do try to meditate. Yoga is a big part of my life. But it's just, even if I'm not doing steps with it, it's always there. I'm really grateful for everything around me. And I try to express that, even just if it's internally to myself or to the others around me.
I'm curious if your spiritual journey is part of that. Because like you said at the beginning, you were like a Buddhist at 5 and then you were like going to church or whatever. Is spirituality still something you explore? And if you do explore it, do you bring it into your work at all?
It is something that is important to me. Like I am incredibly spiritual in the sense because I believe that we're all connected, like my decisions, my actions impact those of, everyone around me and thus the world. So I try to stay very conscious of that at all points. I believe in a universal energy. So, so these kind of things always run through my mind. I've also like engaged in like plant medicines over the years and things of that nature. I'm very curious about the spirit realm, and Yeah, I mean, and it does come into what I do in the sense of, it's funny because actually Alessandro will laugh at me and be like, I'll say something and be like, oh, Julie's on mushrooms again. It's like a running joke at Zhenya about my enjoyment of mushrooms, but which I don't actually do mushrooms all that often. I do appreciate them a lot, but yeah, I don't know. I just think when your mind gets opened to the idea that we're not alone, we're not singular individuals, and everything we do does have impact, that just kind of sticks with you.
Right. And spirituality too is so much a part of human nature. And when through your work you explore human nature, I think there's part of it that you can't help but look to, spiritual practice as a way to almost like explore how we are as people and different cultures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's, even if it's not a direct part of yours, mine, anyone we know's life, it's still a part of human life, and so it's definitely inevitably something worth exploring because it matters to somebody.
Yeah. Tell me about the creative process for you. And I mean, because we all do in a way, but, or we both do rather, we work within a system, right? But we have kind of creativity within our box. So if you're,
Mm-hmm.
Styling an actor or an artist versus doing, an editorial shoot or a fashion show, tell me about your creative process and what you do to kind of push your own limits of whatever project you're on.
It's funny because I look at them all in the same way. They're all storytelling, like if I, as an editor, like with Ocho magazine, like I'm thinking about this whole big picture of the fashion well, whether it's something I'm directly working on or something other stylists and photographers are working on. But it's still this whole editorial story, like what we're putting out there, what our statement is as a magazine. And then, similarly, like if I'm, working with a celebrity, like it's what is their story. So it's editorialized. It's not like I don't give a shit about fame. I really don't. Like it's not but what's exciting is the fact that fame does propel ideas in the sense of like, like a fan, the way they follow their, those that they adore, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know, but like at the end of the day, it's like not the person's fame that's intriguing to me as it is the storytelling, like working with someone like Riz Ahmed, it's his story. I mean, we've now been working together for a long time, like, I don't know, 7 years or so. I don't know. And it was intriguing to me to work with him on telling his personal story through clothes, and getting to know him in this way so that he, as a Muslim man could be seen in a way that is not as a Muslim man, but also infusing his personal culture into looks that we do that, that people are like, that's dope, or like, and seeing themselves through what it is that he wears publicly. I find that very exciting because then if people can see something of a similitude between him and them, then you're breaking down stereotypes in this way. Like Pedro Pascal. I mean, I've known Pedro for a long time. We worked together like a million years ago and then recently, reconnected at I don't know, last year, a few months ago. However, it's all a blur of time. But, like just even thinking if I was going to work with him again, what story are we going to tell? I had no idea the degree of like how that story would fly, but it's just, everything is just instinct, like I only know how to work from instinct. And, or like, I remember when I was working with Lakeith Stanfield, like his Oscars jumpsuit, it just, I don't know, when he was going to the Oscars, it was virtual and, and whatnot. And I just, the only thing I wanted to do was work from the women's collection from Saint Laurent. Like I had like this very specific idea of how I wanted him to be in a jumpsuit that was a suit and la la la. Like, just, it went so viral. Just, I don't know, it's just instinct. But anyway, all that to say, like what I do at a magazine versus a brand versus a celebrity or whatnot, they're all from the same space of storytelling.
What's your process? I'm so curious about this. When you're meeting a new client or interviewing a new client to get that story or to learn about them, what do you have, like an interview process, or what's really your what are the things you go into a new job looking for or asking about?
I mean, I just like to listen, I don't know. It's like what I want to know what the goal is, like, if it's, say, in working with a new brand, like how I can help a designer fulfill their vision, for what they want to see in a big picture, more so than, the immediate. I like working in big pictures. So, or like if it is a celebrity client, thinking about like, I'm going to ask who they are, like, like what music do they listen to, or what band, like what, do they like sports or whatever? I don't know. Like I need to know who a human being is, because it's my job to tell their story in that sense, like in a celebrity context, it's like, whatever they put on their back is their story, as they're dialoguing about a film or a project or what have you. So, I don't know. It's curating how clothes work to that process, or if working with a designer, it's like, thinking about what their big picture is and how what I do with clothes can help, just ground that, I guess.
Yeah. With coming back to Otra magazine, what has it been like to work on print again? And what do you notice? Mm-hmm. How has that storytelling changed, since you were first doing print?
I mean, I've always been involved in print still, just not directly as part of an editorial team. But I truly, truly, truly love being an editor. Like I love working with a group of people to tell a 300 plus page story, even though my part is only, a fraction of that. It's like the grand whole. I think, Otra before me, it was so rooted in art and so respected, and it still is so respected in the art world. But a lot of people in fashion didn't know it, including myself. Like when I first learned of it, I was like, what is this magazine that is literally like all the stuff in my head that I wasn't aware of? I was introduced to the magazine through Jack Pearson. We did a project with Eliza Douglas together, and I was like smitten by the rest of the content and their mission statement, etc. And then, we just, Oliver, the editor-in-chief, and I got to talking, and then, just talked more and more. And so when I came on as fashion director, it's like, how can I do with fashion what they so beautifully have done with art, that it feels like a seamless connection, like I don't have an ego in the sense of like, of course I have an ego, but I don't have an ego where I'm looking to like shine brighter. I shine best when I'm shining alongside. And I love that process. So like, I'm concerned with the book as a whole. It's exciting for me to see more people know about it, and the fashion is meeting the art, so that, people who are going to it maybe for the fashion are realizing that there's incredible art content, there's incredible cultural content, like they're not afraid to speak about things that other magazines might not touch, and it could be just something as simple as like, a bunch of nuns growing weed to to the most brilliant, I don't know, to Hans Ulrich Obrist having a dialogue with Harmony Korine. It's like, the possibilities are endless, but yet finding that cohesive point where like Harmony Korine makes sense with, a Miu Miu sweater. I don't know, like where it all makes sense.
Was it intimidating at first to work alongside art?
No, because I'm an art nerd. It's like my passion. If I'm not working, I'm usually in a gallery or a museum or, something or other. So I have a lot of art around me at all points, like I have a bad habit of collecting. Yeah, I'm like, why?
I would argue it's not a bad habit. It sounds pretty good.
Well, it can get a little hefty when you're like, I must buy this Naudeline Pierre, which I just hung in my dining room actually the other day, and I'm excited about it. No, I mean, no, I don't find it intimidating in that space at all. I find it very comfortable. I'm more comfortable in that space than I am, in an uber fashion environment,
Yeah, that makes
context.
Sense. On the art note, what are your thoughts on, the relationship of fine art with fashion? Of course, over the last few years, I think we've seen a huge uptick in kind of like a fine art fashion collaboration context. I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on that and how art has really come into the fashion picture.
I mean, I think it's great if it's done respectfully and cleverly. I do believe that fashion is an art form, and I think it's on all of us as fashion people to make that understood, as best we can, and to help distinguish between fashion and clothing, in the sense of like that, to help an audience be more discerning. And so when the relationship between the fashion and the fine art worlds come together, I think it's clever. Like Donna Juanca, for example, is a good friend of mine since many years. And, she did a bag with Vuitton. I think that's fucking amazing. I think it's great to see her work on a Vuitton bag. It's like, I find that incredible. Like I don't frown upon these collaborations, or like if Maria Grazia does a Dior show, utilizing the artwork of a female artist. I think it's great. I think these conversations should live simultaneously, because if fashion is an art form, let's embrace it. I mean, just the same, like, there are more fashion parties during Art Basel than there are art parties. But I mean, fuck it. Let people enjoy themselves, really, at the end of the day. I don't know. I think it's fine. Maybe I'm gullible, and I always try to find the bright side to things, but I think I don't find it problematic. Let them live simultaneously. There's enough space for everyone.
Yeah, I think similar. It's really the authenticity that I think matters, right? And I think when, as creatives, we work on instinct. And so I think it really comes down to that, right? Like if it feels, if it has a strong story, if it feels authentic to the artist, I think that's a really important aspect to it. It's interesting how fashion has always been kind of viewed as this kind of less than an art form. Why do you think that is? I mean, I always think about, I love Richard Serra and his art. He has this hilarious interview I think he did with Charlie Rose, like maybe 25 years ago, but he says, I tell my friend Frank Gehry that he's not an artist because he has to worry about bathrooms. And he's like, if you have to worry about bathrooms, you're not an artist. Like art is, and I'm paraphrasing this part, but it's like art is supposed to be useless in a way. I mean, I guess you and I would disagree, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think, of course, there's, the aspect of function to clothes. There's the multiple, if we think about it in terms of like an endless addition, you know what I mean? It's a work of art, with 300 is worth a lot less than, a singular one. But yeah, I mean, the fact that it's sold, it's the same. Photography gets, thought of as a lesser art form than a painting, for, similar reasons. Fashion is sold. I mean, so is art, but it's consumer driven in most forms. And, and it's also, it's hard, fashion has such a huge umbrella that lives over it, because also, a Zara gets thrown into fashion the same way, a Gucci or a Prada. So, it's a hard term to qualify all the time, I guess. Yeah.
And as artists, I think we want people to enjoy what we're doing, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the through line you can find between somebody who's painting or doing ceramics or, creating a brand.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, art is, maybe you can put it in the sense of like art is something that someone's going to do, whether it's being looked at or not, and clothes, there are people who are going to make clothes, whether they're viewed or not, they put them on their own backs and whatnot. But, but then there are clothes that are only made if there is a consumer for them, and that's where we do sometimes get into these tricky spaces about designer changes, because if there's no consumer or no growing consumer, is that designer, with a job, really in simplest form. But so I guess that becomes the gray space.
Right.
Difficulty.
I felt like, from the beginning, even before I knew what fashion was, I really felt like I had to create something, whether I was the only one who ever did it, because it was almost like, it was like busting at the seams of my soul in a way, and I still would be, it took me from graphic printing t-shirts for my friends to iRay where it is now. And I really only feel like I'm 2% of the way through this journey, but it was like 10 years of no one really wanting what I had. But I just kept going because I knew I just had to do it. And it's interesting that it really changed for me when I, came to the conclusion that like, I will do this until I die. And if it's only for me, then that's what it's going to be. Like it was, as soon as I almost let go of what was going to happen, that's when things started happening. And it really is a daily reminder of that. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad to see that more people are seeing and getting behind what you're doing, because it's really beautiful.
Yeah. And like I said, it's people, as artists, we want to create things that people enjoy, so it's, of course it's for me. I'm discovering things about myself as I go along with this process, but It really is a great feeling to see people enjoying what you do. And I'm sure you feel the same way. Like, you know, if somebody buys your magazine, if somebody like wants to be a part of what you're doing, it's an incredible thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Who are the designers or the artists right now that have really been inspiring you?
Let's see, who's been inspiring me? Oh my God, there's so many things that I could say to that. We just did, in the new issue of Otra coming out, I did a story with a photographer called Annie Powers, and I had 14 artists like just come for a sitting, and like they all like were there to be styled, and it like we took the opportunity to like basically just go to who we love, right? Like who would be the most amazing people to have in a room and have be part of this. And thankfully, so many of them said they would, you know, from Shirin Neshat, who I am personally obsessed with as a creative and now as a human, actually, to Talia Levitt, who's like really in the early stages of a beautifully growing career, Hank Willis Thomas, Dan Colin, who, you know, I've known through his, you know, work since the early aughts, you know, in the downtown New York scene. And, you know, so all of these incredible people, Naudeline Pierre, whose work I just purchased, like all of these people in one space coming together. And there are others who I'm not even naming, but like, or Miles Greenberg, like a brilliant, brilliant performance artist and dear friend. You know, like I'm excited by the now, I'm excited by the new, but I'm excited about the new in the context of what I've, you know, appreciated for a long time and how that becomes new again. Yeah, I don't know. It's, that was incredibly inspiring, actually, to have that many people whose work I love in one space.
Yeah, it's so incredible that you get to work with so many different artists and designers, and I'm sure you can't help but feel, you know, a creative energy being around people that are doing amazing work.
Yeah. No, I'm truly grateful for it. I mean, yeah, Marina Abramovich, like she's so cute. She's so sweet. I sat on her lap. She's like, Julie, come sit on my lap. Let's take a selfie. I'm like, what? Yeah, we did a cover story with her for the last issue, which was very exciting. So that was one of my heroes.
She's amazing.
Yeah, who I now have a selfie with and a photograph of me on her lap.
That's amazing.
I was like, okay, I can do nothing ever again.
Yeah, totally.